The purpose of this presentation is to demonstrate what it would look like to apply the principles in the development of multicultural teams as described by Halverson and Tirmizi in Effective Multicultural Teams, Theory and Practice. How to apply that theory to my French class in order to create a more community-centered classroom environment. In this first poster, I'm just situating you in my middle school world language classroom. We're focusing on novice learners. Novice learners are generally like a French 1 class. The students can understand, identify, and produce key words and phrases in an authentic context. World language curriculum at its core focuses on the development of the 4 skills: speaking, reading, writing, and listening. And these skills are developed within 3 modes of communication: interpersonal, interpretive, and presentational. All learning takes place within the 5 C's: cultures, communication, communities, connections, and comparisons. And that includes all, when I say all learning, I mean, all the activities, performance, tasks, etc., sort of contextualized in these 5 domains. Additionally, we're also focusing on, as a middle school, we're also focusing on the students' personal world. Like, that's what a lot of the curriculum is focused on, is themselves, their home, and their school. So in this presentation, the essential question I'm kind of getting at is, how does thinking about the world language classroom through the lens of team development lend itself to curriculum development and a deeper understanding of student interactions? I think that the development of a classroom community in a world language classroom really lends itself well to the structure of multicultural teams. A class is very much like a multicultural team. Students come from all different socioeconomic backgrounds, ethnicities, and academic backgrounds. Some may even come with preconceived notions about language learning based on their previous experiences or the experiences of their family members. And this influences how open they are to learning and speaking a new language. It's very different from a normal classroom setting. So much of the learning relies on students' ability to work together and develop language skills together. And so it's really important that we develop this team. In the second poster, I'm just sort of reframing for you what development might look like in a world language classroom through the lens of the multicultural development. So if we're looking at the stages of team development, forming would be the first one. This is generally at the beginning of the school year or after winter break. We'd be reforming. It can also occur, when there are new students, new seating assignments, etc. But the basic goal is to establish a sense of social and physical safety during this part of the development, and it really aids students in feeling comfortable. For middle schoolers, speaking a new language is just really out of their comfort zone. It's super scary. I mean, it is for most people, but middle schoolers are very self-conscious. In the norming stage, students have gained a little bit of language, and they are more comfortable navigating the classroom. I think this stage usually comes either directly after forming or after maybe a little bit of storming in between, but in my experience is usually after the forming. Depends on the group of students. And it really depends on, have we already gotten grades, feedback, are they able to, sort of better situate themselves in the class. Storming can occur at different points within the school year with different individuals or with the entire class. I've seen both happen. Many times it occurs around the holidays, before grades are due, or when students and staff have been in class for long stretches of time without days off. It can also occur as students are adjusting the class, when everybody's getting to know each other, etc. Performing. This is a point in the school year when students are able to really produce more complicated language and comprehend more nuanced levels of culture. I usually see this stage happen for a little bit in the fall, but for a more extended amount of time in the spring. Adjourning, this might look a little different, but depending on the grade level. 8th grade students are leaving, and so for them, it might be more of a loss. It could also be a loss to students who feel really safe at school. So it really depends on that student and the group, typically 6th and 7th grade students know they'll be back together with the same teacher, and mostly their same friends. So it's not as much of a loss. Here I just give you a brief progression of my units so that you have a little bit of background as we're going through activities that might lend themselves to different stages of team development. So what can students do in a world language classroom during different stages of team development? As I've been reflecting on that, I've been reflecting on, what do I do already and what would be best to do during that stage of team development? And this is what I've come up with. So this stage would really lend itself to playing games, having short interviews, and developing those classroom norms. I think games especially during this time need to be no risk, and meaning like there's very little risk for embarrassment and there's very little investment that the students have to put in, so that they just don't risk very much. A lot of times what I do is have them get together and create a class contract, and then they also in their table groups establish roles and duties for each person. And the learning that's taking place during this at the same time is basic classroom language and establishing the norms, like may I go to the bathroom, when can I go to the bathroom, having that teacher language such as sit down, stand up, come to the board, etc. During norming, I feel like this is sort of an extended time, so students have learned that basic classroom language, and now they can start to build their vocabulary and language awareness, and talk about things that are most familiar to them. And I think that really lends itself to them making connections with each other and establishing that group and building the empathy. So we're really looking at things like talking about their likes and dislikes, their birthday, how old they are, etc. So again, it's low risk, but it's still helping them form connections. Storming presents a challenge. This is a point in the school year when it's really hard to get things done because kids, really need to be able to work together. And if they can't, it's very disruptive to the world language classroom. So as I've been reflecting on this, I've been really thinking that activities that would work best for our group when we're going through a stage like this might be ones that reinforce and review previously learned material. They could be ones that have a lot of repetition so that students don't have to learn a whole lot of new things. If they're doing a lot of repetition each day, there might be new things added on, but it's still repetitive. And or it could be very helpful just to do individual activities so that it gives the teacher time to calm down the mood and to work with kids individually. During performing, this is a time where we can do some really cool stuff, right? We could do group story creation where we're creating stories on the board and drawings and writing. Students can be giving presentations in the language. One thing that, as I've been thinking about this, that really I like to do during our performing stage is some authentic cultural activities. Like crepe making is something that I generally do every year, and this would not work in a stage where students are not as high performing, where they're not as invested, and where they don't trust each other as much. So it really needs to be something that takes place during this performing stage. And then activities that take place during adjourning are really ones that are, wrapping everything up, or talking about the future, so extending the language to what's going to happen next, making portfolios, review games, etc. And here I just give you an overview of different types of activities that we would do as a class and groups independently. And it's just a different framework for looking at it, for looking at the types of activities. So in this last poster, I've put together some typical activities I do every year and kind of assessed where they fit best in the different stages of development. So one of them is a classroom language skit. I like to do this at the beginning of the year. It's a good group building activity. Students don't know very much, but they've learned that basic student and teacher language. I put them in random groups. They have to come up with a short skit, so it's not super risky for them. It's pretty structured because everyone knows the same amount of language. They haven't really diverged yet, but it gives them a chance to sort of work by themselves and together. Another one is designing their own classroom. I feel like this fits really well at a norming stage. Again, it's not super risky, but it's giving them a chance to practice their autonomy. And also, they have the opportunity to work in groups if they want to. Um, Another one is special person interviews. I love this activity. I think it's a really good bridge from norming to performing. Every day we interview a different person, and students have to be pretty flexible because the information on the people is going to be different every day. While the activity itself is repetitive, like each person is an individual, each person is different. It's really helping us build empathy for each person. And what I've noticed is by the end of this activity, students are really performing at a very high level because they're just a lot more confident. They have a lot of empathy for each other. They formed really strong connections. My family tree project is one that can be deeply personal and students can get really creative. So it's one that I feel like they do the best at if this happens during a stage of performing. Because it requires a lot of language and in-depth use of the language and a lot of trust that when they share their project that other people are going to be respectful of them, etc. Um, March Music Madness, one of my absolute favorite activities that I do. It takes place during the month of March. March is generally terrible because it comes right before spring break. And before I started doing this activity, March was just really long. But this is a very repetitive activity. They make kids get a playlist, they make a bracket for the songs, and each day we study a different songs, and they vote, and it gives them a way as I'm thinking about a storming stage. As a potential storming stage, it gives them a way to disagree respectfully, and it gives them that language to really disagree with each other, but in a productive way. And then, as I've kind of mentioned, an individual review game or project could work really well at the end of the year as we're wrapping things up, and also at a point in the year where it could be potentially storming again, where we have different behavior issues because people are nervous about leaving school, and their groups are sort of breaking apart. So I had not thought much about when my activities occur before this project and how they contribute to class and community development. And as I reflect on the developmental stages of multicultural teams, I see that it's really crucial that I recognize stages of development as well as actively facilitate them. Um, the challenge for the teacher is always how to do this while maintaining pace and rigor. And I think that the world language curriculum lends itself really well to these multicultural team stages, development stages, because it's naturally about human development and how we develop language and relationships. And the development of a class, like a team, complements how students start to grow and see themselves as language learners. If a class cannot progress to the performing stage or resolve issues during storming, it hurts everyone and ultimately causes gaps in language development. So I think the language classroom especially is particularly conducive to developing these multicultural teams because not only are we all coming from different backgrounds, but we're interacting with a element that is other and different from us. And so I think that facilitating the development of these teams while creating my world language classroom community can ultimately make us a stronger group and help us learn the language on a much deeper level.